This your first time watching? Hit subscribe, sit back, and enjoy. This is the G Podcast. This is the G Podcast, where we focus on family, friends, finances, freedom, and our future. And everything else, you heard? This is the G Podcast. Whether this be your first time watching, or you've been watching since the start, or you've only caught a few episodes, I really don't give a shit. What I need you to do is hit that subscribe button right this moment. Let's take a second here while you hit that subscribe button. I know it's an important decision. Think long, but don't think wrong. Hit that subscribe. All right. I don't know why that's so difficult for so many people to hit the motherfucking subscribe button. My goodness. Subscribe. That's all I need. This is the G Podcast, man. We focus on family, friends, finances, freedom, and our future. And everything else. This is the G Podcast. I really appreciate everybody who's been tuning in, been rocking with us thus far. This episode, we want to focus on this idea, the difference between fear versus faith. Fear versus faith. But even more specific, how does fear versus faith impact your decision-making process? Thought I was done with those. My bad.
It doesn't matter how you feel.
It's natural. Fear versus faith. How does this impact your decision making? That is so key. I'm going to walk through what I mean by this, but I want you to think about what you do and how much of what you do is impacted based off of your fear of an outcome or your fear of what you might have to face versus the decisions you make because you have faith in what's coming. Fear versus faith. I'm going to explain how this even entered my realm of thinking. Before we get there, let's just think about fear versus faith. How does that impact those 5 F's? How does fear versus faith impact the 5 F's? 5 F's. 5 F's. Five F's. I'm just doing stupid shit right now. Not even going to lie to you. Playing with the camera. 5 F's. 5. fifth. Oh, man. Family. Fear versus faith. How many of us literally make decisions based off the fear of what a family member might think of us or how a family member might react? How many? Think about it. Whether that be a mother, let me step back. Whether that be a parent, a significant other, a grandparent, a guardian. From a family perspective, how often do you make choices not because it's what you want, it's because you fear what someone you love might think about you? Or you fear how someone you may love might feel about you. That's a decision based out of fear, for example. We make them all the time with our family. Faith, however, how often do you make those decisions in spite of what your family might feel or think about you, but you believe in it so much that you do it anyway? Something to consider. Do you make your decisions based off of fear or faith? What's driving the thought process? Friends, same deal. Peer pressure. A lot of us, for whatever reason, struggle to say no to other people. It's not something I deal with.
No. 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 No.
Over and over. No issues. My only issue is hitting this microphone. Sheesh. Let me see my right. All right. Mm-hmm.
No.
Just for good measure. How often do you give in to peer pressure with friends? And did you make these decisions because you were afraid that your friends might not be your friends or will hold it against you in the future? Or you might not get invited to the next event or shindig, whatever the case, right? A lot of us make decisions for friends out of fear that these people won't be our friends any longer. I think that's a silly way to make decisions, if I have to be honest. Friends, that won't matter. Your real friends, your quality friends, should I say. That stuff won't matter. Fear versus faith. Do you make decisions having just knowing that your real friends are just one call away, regardless of how often you spoke and what you've done for them lately? They'll answer the phone. They'll be there for you. Those friends who have conditions is similar to a podcast that we spoke about before in terms of what you expect out of a partner. I mean, same with friends. Some of your friends expect too much out of you. They use your emotions to handcuff you, but whether it be friends, family, we allow this to happen. Fear versus faith. Finances. how many of us make so many decisions out of the fear of not having enough money. Okay. I see all the hands. I see all the hands. The fear of being broke is something I know a lot about from experience. It's not necessarily fun being broke per se, but part of that is our own doing. How often do you make choices because you're afraid of how money is involved, finances? Whether you do or don't do something because of the fear of the money, the fear of the lack of the money. This is a real thing. This is a real thing. Okay. That's family. That's friends. That's finances. Fear versus faith. How many of you make financial decisions because you believe in what you're doing versus making financial decisions because you're afraid of what's to come? There's a difference. Not to say right versus wrong, it's fear versus faith. When it comes to fear versus faith in your freedom, I don't know how many of you have ever had to have a lawyer outside of traffic court. I don't know. But when you say have had to go to court and deal with situations that have an impact on your livelihood, your freedom, fear versus faith is definitely at play there. Beyond that, when it comes to your freedom, do you make decisions because you have faith that you're setting yourself up to exercise your freedom? Or are you living in a way that's like on eggshells because you don't want to ruin or get anything taken away? You're more so fearful of what might come if you pursue something else. Nothing's easy. Fear versus faith, even when it applies to freedom. And when it comes to our future, it's very similar. Are we making decisions that set us up to Are we making decisions driven by our fear of what's coming? Or do we make decisions because we believe in something more? How you perceive your future has such a strong impact on how you approach today. Fear versus faith. When you're stuck in a place of fear, it's hard to move forward. You'll tend to stay right where you are because you're afraid. It's important to challenge yourself in what you're afraid of, because fear and faith have such an impact on how you make decisions, from the smallest to the biggest decisions that you'll ever make. Did you make them because you were afraid? Or did you make them because you have confidence and faith in your decision making? This is different. Now, for me personally, I was living in fear, and I didn't even realize it. I didn't even realize how I was living in fear. I'm going to go through how I came to the realization, because that was a pivotal moment in my life when I realized my mistake and the detriment of living in such fear-based thoughts. You have to find ways to shake this. We cannot afford to be afraid. We cannot afford to be afraid. There is nothing to fear. There is nothing to fear. I cannot say that enough. There is nothing to fear. Don't get in your own way. For me personally, I didn't even realize that I was living in fear. Here's where I started to realize how afraid I really was. This is where it really sunk in for me. If you haven't seen previous episodes, I highly recommend you check them out. It'll give you even more context for what I'm about to explain now. Especially those episodes speaking to the personal, professional, creative framework. What I'm about to speak about now, definitely, if you've seen those, you'll have a little bit more context to understand what I'm about to explain. Now, I've always been big on the idea of partnership. I think it's the most important decision that you can make for yourself as an adult, especially as a straight black male. Who is your partner? Who did you partner with? For me, that decision, I've said it time and time again. It is the foundation in which I've built a lot of basically everything else. That is the foundation that I built everything else. And it's funny because that was definitely a decision driven by this idea of faith. It wasn't fear as I approach my partnership. It was decisions driven by faith. I made decisions not because I was afraid of what might happen. I made decisions because I believed in what I was doing and I was ready to embrace what was next, even though I had no clue. Fear versus faith. When it comes to my marriage with my wife, it's been largely faith-based because I've just had faith in this person for whatever reason since we've met. Spidey senses. Told you I'm like Doctor Strange. Should be going shoo, 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 shoo. Multiverse. And so that sort of decision, while I had faith in what I was doing, I also had a lot of fear along the way because it required me doing things that I had never done in my past. And I know from experience, it's difficult to have faith when you don't have confidence. It's difficult to have faith when you don't have confidence. When you don't have, I would even say, going back to a prior theme, exposure. How can you have faith in something if you've never even been exposed to what's possible? Fear versus faith is so powerful. When it comes to me, and I, again, had a lot of faith in that personal decision. And upon meeting my partner, I had no control over a lot of aspects of my even lifestyle, which was so new to me at that time. But I knew I wanted to experience life with her. So, again, this idea of fear versus faith. If I was with her, I didn't really necessarily care what I was about to take on. Didn't necessarily mean I wasn't afraid. I didn't realize this though. Let's just take a step back. I met my wife. We got married. I met my wife, let's say, May 2012. Got married September 2013. I moved to Mexico April 2014. After we moved to Mexico, we moved to DC around January 2015. Then went to Amsterdam, August 2015. And in that time span was where I figured out I would be going to grad school in Amsterdam. A lot of things had just happened where we thought it would be one thing and it was another. There was a lot of uncertainty. Again, tough to have faith when you don't have confidence, when you don't have it. And it's tough to be confident when you haven't been exposed. It's tough. And I have to be honest, during that time period, I can't say there was any fear because I hadn't been exposed yet. Had not been exposed yet. No fear. Everything's new. I'm feeling unbeatable, like Rocky. You know what I'm saying? Like, I could take on anything. When we got to Amsterdam, my wife and I had been married all of going on 2 years. Newlyweds, still. My wife and I, when we moved to Amsterdam, had been married going on all of 2 years. From that period to we stayed there for 2 years. So we left in summer of 2017. Early 2016. So from summer of 2014, from summer of 2015 to that early year winter of 2016, when we went to Amsterdam, I had got into a graduate program at the University of Amsterdam. Now, when we talk about this fear versus faith, this is when the fear starts to kick in. Because I had never been like a stellar student, if you will. Like, you can ask my mom, like, I never made honor roll in high school. I did go to college and I did graduate with honors. So something clicked in college. But man, I spent a lot of time outside of the classroom in college. I wasn't the best student, but I still managed to find success in my undergraduate program. Before I met my wife, and at the time when I met my wife, she'll even tell you, like, we had conversations. I had no desire to ever go to graduate school. And I would tell every person I met when I was dating, I was like, yo, I don't do that graduate shit, man. Because I hated school. I really hated school. But because I married this person and chose this person and given their lifestyle, I couldn't dare ask them to give up what was required of them when I met them because I didn't want to go to school or because I had never left the country. It was like, you have to figure this out. Do you want this to be with this person or do you not? And so, because I was with my wife, it forced me to explore things that I would have never else explored. I would have never even been open to the idea. But because of the partner I chose, it opened me up to things that I otherwise wouldn't have experienced. Which is, again, why I say, like, choosing a partner is so key, because that partner should be doing something different. It shouldn't just be reinforcing the same. It should be something different there, like adding to the plate, helping you grow in other areas. And so when we left Mexico, I had no idea what I was going to do in Amsterdam. No clue. And I was interviewing, doing other things. We figured out about the university. And so we took I studied, took the GRE, applied to school. And that decision that we were faced with, it was like, man, this is also too where having a supportive partner goes along, or supportful, I don't even know the word right there. Having a partner that's supportive goes a long way. I had an offer to work at the embassy in The Hague in the Netherlands. And I had been accepted to a master's in economics at the University of Amsterdam. And I chose, instead of the job to get the salary, I chose to pursue the master's. And I did that not out of faith. I kind of did it out of fear. I'm not even going to lie to you. It was a fear because I had already experienced what it was like to not have a master's and try to get opportunities in the triangle. It was tough from my experience. It was tough. With just a bachelor's degree in the triangle, I found it difficult personally. And as time progressed, it became even more difficult. So I made a decision. It was strategic, but it was fearful. Not only did I make the decision to pursue the master's versus go get a salary, it required me taking on more student debt. Mm.
No.
Boy, that student debt, boy. So I had already had undergraduate student debt. That's just is what it is. But now we're going to go to Amsterdam. I'm not working and I'm going to take on more debt. The fear is installed like malware. Upload it. It's installed. Because now, one, already was not working and turned down a job to pursue a master's and took on more debt at the same time. It's almost like when a team comes down, misses the three, and then the other team gets the long rebound, gets an easy three on the other, and it's like a double whammy on both sides. It's like, could have been making money, but I took on debt. Not going to be getting income in the short term. So the fear is already there because I've only been with my wife for, at the time, only been married about 2 years upon arriving, and had known each other all of like 3 years. I was fearful already. Man, gee, if you this up, she is going to leave your ass.
It doesn't matter how you feel.
She is gone. All right. There was no way in my head. We got there being married 2 years. If we leave in 2 years and what I've done is accumulated a graduate degree of debt and don't have a graduate degree to show for it, this marriage is toast.
No.
That was what was in my head. So I ain't gonna lie to you. As soon as I realized I would be pursuing this time period as a full-time student, I was afraid. I was afraid. I was afraid of what would happen if I didn't do this. I was afraid of what would happen if I do it and I failed. I was just afraid of all this. Like, it was like, I knew this is what had to be done, and I was afraid. I did not have the belief or faith in myself. I didn't. when I started that program, that Masters of Economics, let me tell you, tough. I don't know about y'all. But for me personally, just growing up, dealing with teachers and education, I never experienced like I never experienced what it was like to argue for higher grades. I never experienced that. If you get a 69, at least this is what it was in high school, 7-point grading scale. So a 69 was the highest F. If your shit was a 68, like teacher would just look at you like, you got a 68. There was no back and forth about why it should be a 70 or here or there. Like, it wasn't expected that you would argue for higher grades. When I went to school in the Netherlands, man, one, just the style in which it wasn't what I was used to. So I'm getting a whole culture shock. Just the fact that the professor is up here writing numbers with these commas instead of decimals. I'm confused like a motherfucker, man. I'm like 1,000 and what? And it's like 1 point something. Motherfuckers using commas. Americans use decimals. Saying shit like Zed. I don't even understand what I'm like, yo, who the is Zed? I don't even know, man. It's crazy, man. Like it was an adjustment that I didn't even foresee. Like I couldn't have predicted it because I had no exposure, no clue what I was signing up for. And for me, that semester, I met some great friends. Shout out to the homies who I met in that econ program, who I speak to this day. The benefit of that program was that I met people from all over the world, man. Those homies are from Brazil, Poland, the UK, Connecticut. Crazy, man. Crazy. Let me see if I'm forgetting anybody. Oh, yeah, my Italian and German homies. And of course, the Dutch homies as well. But you just meet so many different people from so many different backgrounds. But I moved to the Netherlands in the summer of 2015. Yep, correct. And by the winter of 2015, going into 2016, I had failed out of the program. I couldn't pass one class. And this is where like I started to see students going up to people's like after the class, mad, like they would get their results. And so the Netherlands, they were on like a 10-point grading scale. It wasn't something I was familiar with. It was a 1 through 10. And if I remember correctly, honors is maybe 8 and above. And I think passing was around 6. I can't remember exactly. I really can't. But I'll say this. My grades was 1 and 2s. My shit was low as hell. And so my shit is like 1.5. Sometimes my shit be 0.5. I be looking at my shit like, damn, my shit is terrible. And then these other people will be sitting here, they be having a 7.5, and they be like, man, this should be an 8. It should be an 8. And I'll be like, man, damn, my shit say 0.5. And then I would see some of my friends go argue for that 8. I'd be like, oh my goodness. They just got a higher grade because they went and argued. So I told myself, man, I got this 0.5. Let me see if I can get this bitch to a passing grade. Let me go argue for this shit, thinking I'm a damn smooth talking nigga who can argue. The Dutch will humble you. They are honest. Humbled me, that's for sure. In my experience, teachers are supposed to like pat you on the back, tell you, you can do better. It's gonna be okay. You're intelligent. You're smart. A teacher is supposed to talk to you like Khaled. You feel me? Make you feel like you can do something. Not in the Netherlands, man. Teachers don't give you no confidence. They're like, psh. Teacher told me straight up. He said, hey man, this isn't for you. You should do something else. You should do something else. And I was like, excuse me? Boy, that ego took over for a second. I was like, oh, this nigga got me f***ed up. This nigga got me all the way f***ed up. He don't know I'm from Durham, nigga. Like, what's up? But nah, he was right. He was right.
It doesn't matter how you feel.
It doesn't matter. He was right. It was not for me. And what happened was, you know, I felt some very fearful moments. Let me tell you, just as a human being, 2 of the scariest moments I've ever had. The first was when I first got caught by the cops with weed my senior year of high school. That was the scariest. Cops, well, let me say, I was being silly. I was pulled over in a park area, rolling a blunt, and I was with a homie, and essentially cops just pulled up right behind us as I'm rolling a blunt. Very, very silly. When I had to go home and tell my mom, and this is like early senior year too. This is like October, of your senior year of high school. I'm like, Mom, yeah, last night was in the back of the car. Cop let me go, didn't take me in or anything because it was a very small amount. But having to go home and tell your moms that you are in trouble for some shit like that is, nobody ever wants to disappoint their mom, I think. At least in my opinion. Why would you ever want to disappoint your mom? So that was very much I was afraid. Like, I didn't want to go home and tell her that, like, man, I'm a nigga who I got to go to court for some drugs or some dope. You know, them old heads call dope. But that was one of the scariest moments for me, having to tell my mom that. One of the other most just scariest moments for me as an adult was having to tell my wife that, man, I'm a failure and ain't no way in hell I'm gonna pass this econ program because I'm a failure. That was one of the scariest moments for me because up until that moment, I don't think my wife had ever seen me fail at anything. I had never let her down. I hadn't let myself down. And I had to be open about that. And I had to let her know. That was scary. And something happened to me in that moment. When I say something happened, literally, I remember being just afraid. My wife had no clue how bad I was failing. And I was like, man, how is she going to react when I tell her that not only did I take out tens of thousands in debt for a graduate degree, I'm a failure and won't have a degree to show in return. That's some fear. I can't say it enough. And I remember we were in Amsterdam at our apartment. We had like the true that I am. I waited until after our vacation to tell her. We went to Spain. I was like, I'm not bringing this up until we get back from vacation. Let me be clear. We went to Malaga. We stayed in Marbella. We was there for a week. We hit Ronda, Granada, Gibraltar. We was on that Costa del Sol. Great time. I definitely didn't want to bring this up before that trip. Fear versus faith. Before we continue, though, great time to mention this Old Hillside, man. Old Hillside, Centennial Bottle. This is a 101, man. Signed by the founders themselves. Proceeds going to help a great cause. I got a couple bottles because I wanted to see what she was tasting like. Pause. But Old Hillside, shout out to them folk, man. Great product. It's going to be in the stores on the regular here very, very soon, if not already. Shout out to Old Hillside. So, being the true that G is, man, he waited until after they got back from the vacation to let wifey know. So I remember sitting at the table like, and failed everything. Failed everything. And so, upon failing everything, I was like, look, man. Explained it. Told her I hadn't passed one class. And when I tell you, it was a very emotional moment. I'm definitely crying. I'm in tears. Arguably uncontrollable. I felt like such a failure. Like, just unworthy. And I was so afraid in that moment. This is also why I say, having a partner is so important, because depending on your partner, when you have these types of moments, it can make a big difference. For me personally, I was so afraid of having to tell my wife that this was the reality and that I was a failure. And a large part of why I was so fearful was because I was sitting here afraid, thinking about how she might react. Now, if I go on a side note, on a tangent here, man, a lot of folks lie to their partner because they're afraid of how they might react. That is why a lot of people lie to their partners. They're just afraid of how they might react. They're afraid about upsetting their partner, so they lie instead of being honest. Silly fool, silly fool.
It doesn't matter how you feel.
You gotta be honest. You gotta be honest. Can't be out here lying to people, expecting positive outcomes. You gotta be honest. And so when I told my wife how I was failing, I'm gonna be 1,000%. I had no clue what to expect from her. I'm thinking she might divorce me because I'm a failure. I'm not bringing anything to the table. I don't know what's going to happen here. But what ended up happening, whoa, I don't know what even kind of automobile that is. What ended up happening, my wife, actually, let me take a step back, because as I'm speaking to my wife and I'm having this emotional moment, something happens. And I expressed this verbally because I felt it. It went through my entire body from head to toe. And I told my wife in this moment, like, I don't know what just happened, but I felt something. It almost was like I tapped into the superpower, like I had converted over. Like it's the moment where everything changed for me personally. We were at that dinner table, or at that dining room table in Amsterdam. And I'm sitting here having this conversation with my wife. And in my lowest of moments, she's comforting me. She's holding me. And I felt something from head to toe. And I'll never forget it. And it was in that moment where I said, you don't have anything to be afraid of. No need to be afraid. A large part of why I was in such pain and just like discomfort was because I was so afraid. I was afraid of failing. I was afraid of getting divorced. I was afraid of what I was going to do in the future. I was afraid of what I would do after I was going down this spiral of fear. Fear-based decisions. And it was within those moments where the ship turned and the sails went in a different direction. Fear versus faith. I had realized in that moment how I had been moving in fear versus pursuing things, having faith in myself and my ability. That was when it changed. Up until that moment, I had fallen into a trap of making decisions because I was afraid of what would happen if I didn't do something else. I was afraid of what would happen. I didn't necessarily have faith in what I would achieve. I didn't necessarily have faith in my abilities. I made decisions because I was afraid of what might happen. It's not a good way to make decisions. It's a terrible way to make decisions.
No.
And it took me hitting that moment. That moment where I had failed, where then I'm being comforted by my wife. And it's crazy too, because while being comforted by her, I said to myself, if she leaves you, so what? You still that man. You still that. When you talk about fear versus faith, I had to snap back to realize like who I was. We can forget that so easily. We can so easily forget who we are. I know what that's like to get lost, to be driven by fear. But in that moment, I realized, I said, I'm not making any more decisions based off of what I'm afraid of. I'm not making any more decisions based off the fact that I might be afraid of what's to come. It's not happening. I make decisions because I believe in who I am and I believe in what I can do. Fear versus faith. I was living in fear and I didn't even realize it until I realized it. And then I started thinking about how many choices have I really made because I was afraid versus because I had faith. And when I started looking at these fear-based decisions, I started realizing, man, these are some of the worst decisions that I've made in my lifetime. They were rooted in the fact that I was afraid of something. So I was either running away from something. I'm making decisions because I'm running away versus chasing something. That's a difference. Are you running away out of fear? Are you running away out of fear? Or are you pursuing out of faith? There is a difference. And when you're running out of fear, you're bound to run out of breath. When you're pursuing out of faith, you will find what's necessary to keep going. That's fear versus faith. We cannot afford to make decisions based out of fear. But yet we do this so often. Whether it be fear of our own family, what our parents might think, what our significant others might think, our kids, grandparents, aunties, uncles. We make so many decisions because we want to not rattle their cages. So many. Friends, our so-called friends all around us. We make so many decisions to make sure our friends are happy, even though we're not cool with the choice that we're making. We make so many decisions because of that fear of being broke, that fear of scarcity, not having enough, when God has given you everything you always needed. And then when it comes to freedom, what is freedom? We all see it so different. Fear versus faith. Do you make decisions because you're afraid? Or do you make decisions because you believe? That alone, you could argue, is a definition of freedom. And then when it comes to our future, do you have faith or are you afraid? Fear versus faith. The future is not a place for the fearful. You have to believe. And that starts with yourself. You got to believe in you. There is no future if you don't believe in you. Fear versus faith. The whole point of this, I don't know if people really think about how aware they are when it comes to their decision-making process. Are you really aware of how much of your decision-making is based off of your fear versus your faith in what's coming? And how has that impacted your livelihood? Fear versus faith. Are you even aware that you're making decisions and yet these decisions you don't even believe? You're afraid. You're making decisions because you're afraid, not because you believe in something. I think it's time that we make more faith-based decisions and stop doing things out of fear. What do you actually believe in versus what you're afraid of? That's a tough question to answer, but we got to think about it more often. What do we actually believe in? And when it comes to ourselves, what is it about yourself that you believe in, that you don't have to be fearful? You believe in yourself. Because I'm telling you now, as a married, I've been married going on a decade.
Wow.
Whole decade. And what I know being married almost a decade, in my opinion, if you aren't comfortable enough to know that your partner can just wake up tomorrow and say, I'm done. If that's a problem for you, if your whole reason not to get married is out of the fear of divorce, you shouldn't be getting married. The fear of divorce should not stop you from getting married. Fear versus faith. Way too often I hear the reason as to why people don't get married is because of their fear of divorce. It's not a good reason to not get married.
It doesn't matter how you feel. It doesn't matter who you are in mind.
No.
You got to have faith in your decisions. That's the key to any of this. Do you even have faith in your choices? Or are you just fearful when you make the choice? Faith is critical. Fear is detrimental. We cannot afford to make those fear-based choices. I really want you to examine for your own personal lens how many of your choices are made out of some sort of fear-based decision. Afraid of the outcome, afraid of what the other person might think, afraid of what someone might say, or even afraid of how someone you love might feel. So you do something that you know isn't for you, but it's out of fear of a potential outcome. Have more faith in who you are. And if you are afraid of these other things, I would encourage you to embrace the fact that you have everything you need and there is nothing to be afraid of. That is a beautiful thing. Knowing that you have everything you need and there is nothing to be afraid of. Don't make decisions because you think there is something out there that you should be afraid of. There's nothing to fear. You should understand and know that God has given you everything that you need. There is nothing to fear. This is the G Podcast. Don't let fear drive your decision making. I cannot say that enough. Fear versus faith. How does it impact your decision making? We cannot make fear-based decisions. We must have faith. Believe in you. Believe in your ability. And believe in something greater than yourself. This is the G Podcast.
Final system check for re-entry.
This is the G Podcast, where we focus on family, friends, finances, freedom, and our future, and everything else. This is fear versus faith. That fear and embrace the faith. This is the G Podcast.